I came to see my friend, but the way his mother looked at me that night changed everything. I hadn't expected to arrive before him. The plan was simple: take the evening bus from the city, spend the weekend catching up like we used to, and escape the noise of everything that had been weighing on my mind. But when the door swung open, it wasn't my friend who greeted me, it was her. She stood there, framed by the soft glow of the hallway light, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. Not mocking, more like she knew something I didn't. 40-something, with a kind of effortless grace that didn't ask for attention but quietly commanded it. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, touched with the faintest shimmer of silver near the edges, and her eyes, warm, alert, studied me as though she was already piecing me together. "You made it," she said, her voice carrying that smooth blend of surprise and welcome, as though the house had been too still until this moment. "He's running late, something about traffic, I think. But come in, don't stand out there." The warmth of the house wrapped around me as I stepped inside, faint scent of fresh coffee still lingering in the air, a soft tick of the grandfather clock echoing down the hall, the quiet hush of a suburban evening settling in. I set my bag down near the stairs and offered a handshake out of habit. She took it, not hurriedly, not formally either. Her fingers were warm, smooth, lingering just a moment longer than I expected. It wasn't suggestive, not yet, just enough to feel deliberate. "It's been years, hasn't it?" she asked, stepping back slightly to look me over as though the boy she once remembered was now someone unfamiliar. "You've grown into yourself." I laughed lightly, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, I guess so. I didn't think I'd be beating him here, though." "He does that often," she said with a small shake of her head, walking toward the kitchen. Her steps were unhurried, her presence calm in a way that made the quiet house feel less empty. "I was just about to make tea. Would you like some?" I followed her, the polished wood under my shoes creaking faintly as I moved. The kitchen was warm, bathed in the late afternoon light filtering through half-drawn curtains. It felt lived in, not staged, not sterile, but full of soft edges and little traces of her life, a book left open on the counter, a half-empty mug, the faint hum of the kettle. As she poured water, she glanced over her shoulder. "You look tired. Long week?" "Something like that," I said. She offered a small smile, one that didn't ask for explanation, just acknowledgement. And for a moment, brief, passing, I felt something in her gaze, a kind of noticing. Not intense, not inappropriate, just present. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug when she passed it to me. The steam curled between us, and somewhere in the quiet hum of that kitchen, the weekend had already started, just not in the way I imagined. The rain started softly against the windows not long after I settled in. It was the kind of rain that didn't demand attention, more a hush than a storm, a steady rhythm that made the house feel even more secluded from the world outside. She moved around the kitchen with an ease that came from habit, not performance. Every motion, the way she reached for the tin of tea leaves, the way she wiped a droplet from the counter with the back of her hand, was unhurried, quietly graceful. I found myself watching her without meaning to, the way people do when they're trying to read someone, not just look at them. "Do you take sugar?" she asked, her back half turned as the kettle hummed. "Just a little," I said. She nodded without looking, adding a spoonful as though she already knew. When she finally turned, two steaming mugs in hand, she had that same calm poise she'd greeted me with at the door. She set one mug down in front of me and settled against the counter, not across the table, closer, yet casual. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. The city. The bus ride. Her garden, which she claimed the rain would save from her own neglect this week. But there was a point, somewhere between the steam rising from the cups and the rain tapping its soft insistence, where the conversation drifted into something else. She asked about my work, and I told her. She asked if I liked it, and I hesitated. That pause, it seemed, made her tilt her head slightly, her eyes narrowing in a way that wasn't judgment, more like curiosity wrapped in empathy. "It's strange," I admitted finally, how you can be busy all the time, surrounded by people, and still feel like you're just passing through their world. Her lips pressed together for a moment before they curved into something that was neither pity nor amusement. I know that feeling, she said softly. You start wondering if anyone really notices what you're carrying. Her voice was low, her gaze steady. I felt it then, the weight of being seen, even just a little. It was both grounding and unsettling. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a simple gesture, yet it caught my eye. It revealed the slender line of her neck, the delicate glint of a small earring, the softness of someone at ease in her own space. The rain deepened outside, filling the silence between our words with its quiet percussion. Your friend will probably be a while, she said finally, her tone light again, though her eyes held the same depth. He always underestimates traffic. We might as well make the evening comfortable. I nodded, wrapping both hands around my cup, letting the heat seep into my palms. There was no rush. No forced conversation. Just the two of us, in a kitchen that smelled faintly of bergamot and rain, waiting for someone who, for the first time that evening, didn't quite feel like the center of the story. By the time evening settled in, the rain had eased into a quiet drizzle. Streetlights outside painted the wet pavement in faint orange reflections, and the house felt even more like its own small world. My friend texted again, still stuck. Don't wait up, hours, maybe. I read the message twice before setting the phone down. She noticed. He has a gift for being late, she said with a dry little laugh as she adjusted a cushion on the couch. We should at least make the waiting less dull. She suggested a movie, something light, something to pass the time. I agreed, and soon enough we found ourselves in the living room. It was warm from the earlier fire she'd kept going, the faint crackle of the last few embers filling the quiet spaces between our words. She brought a soft blanket, laying it across the middle of the couch almost as an afterthought. She didn't sit right next to me, not at first, but not far either. Just enough space that I could feel the subtle pull of her presence, the way you notice a candle's warmth even before you move your hands closer. The movie played, but for long stretches, neither of us paid much attention to it. There were moments when her laugh, low, unhurried, genuine, broke the quiet, and I found myself watching her more than the screen. Once, as she reached for the edge of the blanket to draw it over her lap, the back of her hand brushed against mine. Light as breath. She didn't pull away quickly. Instead, she glanced down, then up at me, a faint smile ghosting her lips as though the touch hadn't been accidental, or perhaps as though it hadn't mattered enough to call it one. Her perfume, something faintly citrus with a trace of vanilla, lingered in the air, mixing with the fading scent of wood smoke. I realized, sitting there, how easily the house had absorbed me, the ticking clock in the hall, the low hiss of the rain, the hush that only seemed to deepen the more we let silence stretch. At one point, a scene in the movie drew a soft chuckle from her. She turned, her eyes catching mine. It was just a second, maybe two, but in that span, I felt a kind of quiet question pass between us. Not a request. Not even a promise. Just a subtle awareness, like the first faint current before a tide begins to pull. I shifted slightly, unsure if I should speak, but she looked back to the screen, her profile calm, composed. No words, no steps taken, just a shift, almost imperceptible, but real. The kind that doesn't need to be named to change the air between two people. The movie ended, its credits rolling quietly as the rain outside softened to a mist. Neither of us moved right away. The living room was wrapped in the kind of dimness that made time feel slower, a faint glow from the fireplace, a muted lamp in the corner, and nothing else. She broke the silence first, her voice low, almost as if speaking too loudly might disturb the quiet we'd built. Do you ever feel like you're always running? I turned to her. Running? Through life, she said, her eyes fixed somewhere on the half-empty teacup in her hands. Always rushing ahead, but somehow, unseen. The words hung there, heavier than the question itself. I shifted, feeling a ripple of something deeper in her tone, not dramatic, but honest. It wasn't small talk anymore. Yeah, I admitted after a moment. More often than I'd like to say. Even when I'm with people, it sometimes feels like I'm just passing through their day. Not really noticed. Her head turned slightly, her gaze finding mine. For a brief moment, the world felt very still. There was no clock ticking loud enough to interrupt, no rain heavy enough to fill the pause between us. She reached out, fingers lightly touching my forearm. It wasn't a bold move, it wasn't a hesitation either. Her touch was warm, grounding, the kind of simple contact that carries weight because it asks for nothing. "I see you," she said softly. The words were almost a whisper, but they stayed with me as if etched there. Her hand lingered a second longer than politeness would require, then she withdrew it, slowly, like someone careful not to undo what had just been shared. The air shifted then, charged but fragile. She stood, almost too quickly, and cleared her throat. "I'll make more tea," she said, her voice returning to that easy, composed register. I watched her move to the kitchen, the faint sway of her silhouette in the doorway, the quiet clink of porcelain as she busied herself with the cups. For the first time, I felt the tension between what was said and what was left unsaid. It wasn't romantic in any obvious way, there were no declarations, no deliberate steps taken, but it was intimate. Quietly, undeniably intimate. When she returned with the tea, we both pretended it was the same evening as before. Conversation returned to safe topics, music, the weather, old stories about her son and the trouble he used to get into. But the moment had already happened. And once it does, you can't quite return to how things were. You carry it, quietly, in the space between every word that comes after. It was well past midnight when I finally decided to head to the guest room. The house had grown utterly still, even the rain had stopped, leaving behind that peculiar silence that only follows a storm. I padded down the hallway, the faint creak of the old wooden floor carrying louder than I intended. She appeared at the far end of the corridor, just as I was about to open the door. Her hair was down now, a soft frame around her face, and she held a folded throw in her arms as though she had been tidying up before bed. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying that low, velvety tone the night seemed to amplify. "Just turning in," I said. "Didn't mean to make noise." She walked toward me, her bare feet making almost no sound. The hallway light was dim, spilling golden shadows across her features. There was something different about her in that moment, not careless, not exactly bold, but freer. As if the absence of the world outside had peeled away one layer of the day. She stopped beside me, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her shoulder as it passed mine. The scent of her, faint citrus and something warmer, like amber, lingered between us. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smirk. "You came here for him," she murmured, her eyes holding mine with an unreadable softness, "but you'll stay for me, won't you?" I felt the words more than I processed them at first. They landed somewhere between tease and truth, light in delivery, but layered in meaning. My voice caught, unsure whether to laugh it off or answer seriously. She didn't wait for an answer. Her smirk softened into a faint smile, the kind that left you wondering whether she meant it at all or only wanted to see how you would react. "Good night," she said gently, stepping past me. Her shoulder brushed mine again, this time unmistakably, a delicate, lingering contact that set a quiet pulse running through my chest. As she moved down the hallway, the fabric of her robe whispered against the wood. She didn't look back. I closed my door slowly, leaning against it for a moment. The room was cool, the sheets still untouched, but my thoughts weren't calm. Her words, playful as they were, carried weight. They cracked the surface of something that had been building in the silences, the glances, the touches that lingered just a second too long. It wasn't a line crossed. Not yet. But it was a line drawn, one that now shimmered faintly between us, waiting to see who would step closer. Morning came quietly, as if the night had left no trace. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window in thin, golden stripes that stretched across the tiled floor. The rain had passed, leaving the air cool and washed clean. I followed the faint aroma of coffee, its warmth pulling me from the unsettled sleep I drifted in and out of. She was already there, standing by the counter with her hair loosely tied, a few strands falling free. Her robe had been replaced by a soft cardigan, sleeves pushed to her elbows. There was no trace of the teasing smirk from the hallway, only that composed, welcoming calm she wore so naturally. "Morning," she said, looking over her shoulder with a gentle smile. "Coffee?" "Please," I replied, my voice still heavy from sleep. She poured a mug and handed it to me. For a brief moment, her fingers touched mine, not in passing this time, but in a quiet, steady way. It wasn't electric like the night before, but it wasn't empty either. It was grounding, like the warmth of the mug itself. I leaned against the counter as she moved about the kitchen. "Did he text you?" I asked, meaning my friend. She shook her head, a faint huff of amusement leaving her lips. "No. He probably fell asleep on someone's couch, knowing him. Don't let it bother you, that's just how he is." The light caught her face as she spoke, softening the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, lines that only made her expression warmer. There was a steadiness to her this morning, something that told me she had decided how this day would go. She looked at me, this time with a trace of something unspoken, not regret, not embarrassment, just an acknowledgement. "About last night," she began, then paused, searching for the right words. "I was teasing. Don't let it trouble you." I nodded slowly, sipping the coffee, the heat anchoring me in the moment. "It didn't trouble me," I said quietly. "Just made me think." A small laugh escaped her, one that eased the air between us. "Good. Thinking's not so bad. As long as we remember where we are." We both smiled at that, not out of awkwardness, but understanding. Whatever passed between us the night before hadn't been erased, but neither of us was pretending it hadn't happened. It had simply settled into something quieter, something that didn't need to be named to be respected. The morning stretched on without hurry. We shared a simple breakfast, toast, fruit, more coffee. Conversation drifted back to easy ground, the garden after the rain, the smell of wet earth, the way the neighborhood always felt half asleep on weekends. And yet, beneath all of it, there was that soft, lingering current. Not dangerous now, just quietly alive. Like a flame turned low but steady, waiting, if ever called upon, to rise again. By the time my friend finally walked through the door, the house felt different, not busier, not livelier, just realigned. He came in with his usual noise, the scrape of his sneakers on the floor, the clatter of his bag against the wall, a quick apology for the delay that didn't quite cover the hours he'd been gone. We exchanged the expected greetings, the half-laughs that belong to old friends, but my mind was still somewhere else, in the hush of the night before, in the quiet morning that followed. She was there too, moving around with the same unhurried calm she had shown me from the start. If he noticed anything different in the air, he didn't say so. The afternoon passed easily. We caught up, played the role the weekend was meant for, and for a while, everything folded back into its proper place. She was his mother, the host. I was the guest. The edges were smoothed, the lines drawn again, but they weren't the same as before. When it came time for me to leave, the late summer sun was beginning to dip, painting the porch in a soft amber light. He offered to drive me to the station, but I told him I preferred the walk. She followed me to the door, carrying nothing but that faint, familiar warmth in her eyes. "Did you get what you came for?" she asked, a playful edge in her voice that didn't quite mask the sincerity beneath. I smiled faintly. More than I expected. There was a pause, the kind that feels full rather than empty. Then she stepped closer, not hesitant, not bold, just near enough that I could smell the soft trace of her perfume, still lingering like the evening air. Her arm slipped gently around me, a brief, warm embrace. Her cheek brushed near mine, and for a heartbeat, I felt the calm rhythm of her breath. Not hurried. Not expectant. Just there. "Take care of yourself," she said, her voice low, steady. Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer than politeness required, that same look she'd given me the first night, only now it carried something else, an understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that something had passed between us, even if only in the subtle space of what might have been. I nodded, my hands tightening briefly on the strap of my bag. "You too," I managed. And then I stepped down the porch, the warm air brushing against my skin, the sound of a distant lawnmower somewhere down the street blending with the soft rustle of leaves. As I walked away, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel the ache of something unfinished. I felt steady. Changed, perhaps, not in the dramatic way movies promise, but in the quiet way real life sometimes moves us, slowly, unexpectedly, leaving behind a thread of warmth that hums long after you've gone.